Imagine a food plant. You plant once, and it returns each spring for decades, surviving frost, drought, and flood, feeding families with no seed to buy and no debt to repay. If it is so resilient, why did almost every farmer abandon it? Not because it failed, because it could not be sold twice. The real story begins in a garden, unlike any you have seen. In the old gardens of Europe and Asia, food grew in living layers. Trees offered shade and fruit above, shrubs filled the middle, and beneath the surface, roots quietly built a larder for the winter. These perennial beds were more than a patch of soil. They were a kind of household forest designed to last across generations. Hidden among these roots was a plant with many names. In medieval monasteries, it was called chervis. In Old English, skirret, brightroot, hinted at its pale color. Further east, Western botanists traced it to China, where it became known as shan qin, though the true lineage blurs into the wild umbellifers of mountain valleys. Each name tells a story of migration, adaptation, and quiet usefulness. Skirret was never a crop of the open field. It belonged to the margins, to kitchen gardens, monastery beds, and cottage plots tucked behind stone walls. Its roots, slender and sweet, waited below ground as the seasons turned. Families knew that once planted, skirret would return year after year, outlasting harsh winters and careless summers alike. The plant's many names, scattered across languages and centuries, are proof of its long companionship with people. It was never famous, but it was always there, steady, perennial, and woven into the daily pattern of survival. In these layered gardens, permanence was not a problem, it was the plan. A gardener kneels in late autumn, hands deep in cold earth, feeling for the crown. Skirret does not grow a single thick root. Instead, it forms a living cluster, dozens of slender, sweet roots radiating from a central core. Each root is shaped by the soil, some straight, some crooked, all pale as bone. The method is simple: lift the clump, break away what you need, and set the rest back in the ground. The crown holds life for another year. Next spring, new shoots will rise again. This is not a harvest that ends a cycle. It is a conversation with the plant. Take some, leave some, and the larder refills itself. Among gardeners, a saying survives: you take what you need, and the plant keeps going. There is a story told in mountain villages of a winter when soldiers burned fields and stole grain. In the dark, a widow crept to her garden, digging quietly by hand. Skirret roots, hidden beneath frozen soil, fed her through the siege. By spring, she was the only one left on her street. The soldiers had missed what they could not see. That is the nature of a perennial root. It survives invisibly, outlasting disaster by waiting underground. For those who remember, the lesson is clear. Resilience is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply a root that returns. In gardens where skirret is left undisturbed, the same crown can keep producing for a decade or more. Growers talk about plants that have stood in the same patch for 10, even 12 years, their roots thickening and multiplying with each passing season. In good soil and steady moisture, a single mature clump can yield up to 1 kilogram of roots in one winter, though not every plant will reach that mark. Most gardeners describe a slow build, modest harvest the first year, then a steady climb as the crown matures. The roots come in all shapes, some straight, some twisted, but the volume adds up. Unlike crops that demand replanting or rotation, skirret's productivity is cumulative. Each year you take a share, and the rest continues underground, storing energy for the next cycle. There are no large-scale yield trials, just the quiet records of home gardeners who measure success in handfuls, not truckloads. Their stories give skirret its reputation, a root that pays out over time, not all at once. Machines brought order to the fields, straight lines, even spacing, crops that rose and fell on a single schedule. The annual plow became a ritual, turning over every inch of soil each spring. Root crops that fit this system, carrots, beets, parsnips, could be sown in rows, pulled by hand, or lifted by new iron harvesters. Each season was a clean slate: plant, grow, rip out, repeat. Skirret, with its tangled crowns and unpredictable roots, refused to fit. It stayed in clumps, sending its fingers in every direction, defying the geometry of drills and harvesters. Machines struggled with the mess. Thin roots snapped, crowns broke apart, and much of the crop stayed hidden in the ground. The logic of mechanization favored crops that could be measured and managed in bulk. Crops that finished their business in a year. Skirret's perennial cycle clashed with the new rhythm. There was nothing to reseed, nothing to plow under, and no easy way to count what was left. The plant became a technical problem, not a commodity. A crop that lives for years beneath the soil is hard to count and even harder to tax. Early farm ledgers tracked bushels of wheat, sacks of barley, and cartloads of hay. Fields were visible from the road, harvests that could be measured in one sweep. But perennial roots like skirret, dug in handfuls from cottage plots and kitchen gardens, slipped through the cracks of the ledger. There was no single harvest day, no annual yield to record, just a quiet, ongoing supply that never appeared in official tallies. For the state and the landlord, these roots were almost invisible, too small, too scattered, too persistent to fit the arithmetic of tribute and rent. As agriculture shifted toward markets and machinery, the logic of value changed. Seed companies and merchants built their business on crops that needed to be bought and replanted every year. Annuals created a reliable cycle of sales. Last year's seed was spent, and this year's profits depended on new orders. Skirret, once planted, could be divided and kept going for a decade or more. There was no reason to return to the merchant, no need for a fresh transaction. In a system built to reward what can be measured and sold again, a perennial root that hides underground and renews itself is a problem without a price tag. Its value is real, but it does not move through markets or ledgers. That is how a dependable food plant becomes invisible, not by failing in the field, but by slipping outside the lines of control and commerce. When war cut off the railways and ration books ran thin, governments turned to gardens for a buffer against hunger. In Britain, the Board of Agriculture printed manuals urging families to dig every spare patch of earth. Potatoes, carrots, and beets filled the official lists, but in older gardens, a few perennial roots still lingered out of habit. These plants, often overlooked by planners, could stay in the ground through frost and neglect, offering food when annual crops failed or stores ran out. Allotment campaigns showed how quickly a nation could pivot to home production, but they also revealed what was missing. Crops that survived without replanting, roots like skirret, were rarely counted, yet in places where they endured, families had a quiet reserve. The lesson was clear. When the system faltered, it was the hidden, persistent crops that softened the blow of scarcity. Modern growers describe skirret roots as sweet and nutty, with a flavor somewhere between carrot and parsnip. While exact nutrition numbers are still missing, its relatives are rich in inulin, a type of fiber known to feed gut bacteria and help balance blood sugar. Skirret likely shares these benefits, though its true composition waits for a careful lab test. Its deep, spreading roots grip soil tightly, making it valuable for stabilizing banks and holding ground in wet weather. In permaculture gardens, skirret is prized not just for food, but for the way it supports soil life and resists erosion. Today, most skirret plants are traded among seed-saving networks and small nurseries. One healthy clump can be divided and shared, passing from gardener to gardener. In these quiet exchanges, skirret is finding its way back into living beds, no longer just a relic, but a promise renewed each spring. Today, most food systems reward what can be measured, bought, and replaced. Crops like skirret quietly challenge that logic, offering resilience and autonomy instead of dependence. In a world facing climate shocks and supply uncertainty, the question is not why Skirret disappeared. It is what else we are overlooking right beneath our feet.